Good evening. I'm happy to welcome Professor Phillips from Indiana University. Thank you for being here. ICER is continuing its series of interviews with international experts on Russia and Ukraine. Well, you are the director of the Robert F. Byrnes Russian and East European Institute and a professor of anthropology. Your research interests include, among other topics, post-socialist transformation, Chernobyl, and gender and women's studies. Russia is invading Ukraine and intensive fighting is being reported as well from some of the large cities. So Ukraine is under attack and we are currently observing a great mobilization of Ukrainians in defense of their country. Is the Russian invasion already changing Ukrainian identity?
That's a great question, Lucas, and thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. So I do not think that Ukrainian identity is really changing because Ukrainians have always had a very strong cultural identity, a strong national identity, and furthermore, they have been building a really vibrant civil society over the last 3 decades of Ukrainian independence. So I too, like many, am just completely inspired by how the Ukrainian people have come together and the resilience that they're showing and the spirit of cooperation and mutual aid that we all see playing out in the midst of this, terrible destruction and these violent attacks. But I don't think that it's anything new, frankly. I think what is new is that the rest of the world is now seeing Ukraine through different eyes and is realizing the resiliency of the Ukrainian people. So I think the answer is no. Ukrainian identity has not changed that much, but certainly people are coming together in a way that is very inspiring.
Thank you. Since we're talking about civil society, some Western universities and cultural institutions have announced, in light of the current conflict, to stop working with Russia. However, some Russian intellectuals on the other side, and scientists as well, have criticized Putin's war openly and must fear consequences. What is the effect on the cultural and scientific community in Russia?
Another great question. Before I address it, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to this question of Ukrainian civil society. I think it's really important to drill down into this and to think about the ways that people in Ukraine, by necessity, have had to build civil society ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Let's think about the various revolutions, right, that have happened in Ukraine. We have, the Ukrainian independence, which was not a revolution per se, but it was a referendum in 1991. People voted, over 92% of the populace voted in favor of Ukraine becoming an independent state, independent from the Soviet Union. But then the people in Ukraine weathered a terrible economic collapse and basically economic crises over the next decade. By necessity, they had to take care of one another. They had to come up with really creative ways for survival, economically, socially, culturally. Then we have the Orange Revolution, right, in 2004. Then we have the Euromaidan, the Revolution of Dignity. Again, Ukrainians are building a civil society all through these crises. They are finding, creative solutions to collective problems, and they are really dealing with problems in ways when the state has not been very helpful, let's say. So creatively organizing outside of the state. So, to get back to your question, Lucas, about Russian institutions and what this means for different scholarly communities in Russia, different cultural communities. I don't want to say a whole lot about that because I don't want to speak for people, and I think it's still unclear what the repercussions are going to be. But I will say that my heart goes out to my colleagues in Russia and across Russia who are in, the intellectual spheres, who are in cultural spheres, and who vehemently disagree with this war that Vladimir Putin has waged on Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, who are doing what they can to speak out and to show their resistance, but who feel very limited, who feel that they have very little power to change anything. And as some colleagues have said to me, are really feeling trapped. They're feeling trapped inside their country. They're feeling trapped by the ideology that is so pernicious, and they don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So my heart does go out to those colleagues in Russia.
Thank you very much. Well, in the context of the current war, Mr. Putin has made several times clear that he perceives the dissolution of the Soviet Union as a tragedy. In which way is this idea related to the Russian politics towards Ukraine since 2014?
Yes, well, it's very directly related, right? In 2014, we saw the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. We saw Russian support and really riling up of separatist ideologies and movements in Eastern Ukraine, and basically an occupation of Eastern Ukraine. And I think all of that is directly related to Putin's inability to sort of get the message that Ukraine has been a sovereign nation, a sovereign country for 30 years. There's this ideology of Ruski Mir, right? The Russian world, like the greater Russian world. But there's also this idea, I think, that he wants to, put the Russian Empire back together. It's simply not going to happen. And I think, the aggression that we saw against Ukraine in 2014, really, there were very few consequences, right, for Putin and for Russia. And so, he's been emboldened. And now we're seeing the tragic results of that. My colleagues who, of course, Ukraine is front and center in all of our discussions, all of our programming at the Institute, everything that we do, this war is front and center. And one of my colleagues from Ukraine made the point, Ukraine is a country the size of Texas, and it's fighting for the entire world. And the feeling is that if Putin is not stopped, if this war is not stopped by the international community, Ukraine is the first domino. Ukraine is the first tragic and bloody domino that is going to fall in this quest to recapture the former Soviet Union and dare I say the Russian Empire.
Okay. You have done research in the symbolic fallout of Chernobyl, which stands, as far as I believe, for the failure of the Soviet Union. A few days ago, Russian troops were taking over Chernobyl on their way towards Kiev. Didn't this moment have a very bizarre symbolism?
Well, it certainly is bizarre. I would say that's the right adjective. Not only is it bizarre, but it's terrifying. You speak of the symbolism, and I've written about this, and others have talked about it. There's this sense that possibly, the 1986 Chernobyl disaster and the states, the Soviet Union's, the states' really botched response to that disaster might have been one of the straws that broke the camel's back, so to speak, and really convinced people in Ukraine that the Soviet government was not looking out for their best interests, and it was best for them to, go out on their own. So yes, the fact that that now Chernobyl has been recaptured by the Russian military is bizarre. And it should be terrifying to the whole world, I would say. I have been trying to follow this very closely, and I have been surprised at how little information we have. How little information we have about what is happening right now at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. There have been some unconfirmed reports that the plant workers have been essentially kidnapped, that radiation levels are sort of elevated, and the reasons for that are not clear. But I have not been able to verify these reports, and I think that the world should be watching this and should be very concerned about what is happening in and around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant.
Thank you. Would you like to add any additional points in regards to the current situation in Ukraine and your views on what is going on there?
Sure. It's got to stop. I mean, this unprovoked, unjustified attack on a sovereign nation, it's just got to stop. There was I don't know if you've seen it yet, but there was an incredible op-ed today in the New York Times by the head of the presidential office of Ukraine, Andrei Yermak, talking about what the world needs to do, what Europe needs to do to stop this war. I'm in touch with a lot of people on the ground, and I think that while well-meaning, a lot of the press in the West, and maybe even coming out of Ukraine, has been quite celebratory in terms of, focusing on the resilience of people in Ukraine, focusing on, how surprised everyone is that Ukrainians are putting up such an amazing defense and resistance in the face of, terrible military might on Russia's part. But I don't think that we should get carried away with celebrating because people are still very vulnerable. I've heard people say, I feel like a sitting duck, right? And so we can't get carried away by the stories of resilience. We have to really, we have to send help. And so what I'm hearing from friends on the ground is that a humanitarian convoy, an international humanitarian convoy is needed ASAP to get medicine, supplies, just emergency equipment into the country where it needs to go. But folks are also calling for a safe passage of people out of the country. So in other words, a secure escort to allow vulnerable people to escape. There's a great fear that, well, let's say this way, there's great appreciation for the I don't know what the right word is here. There's great appreciation for the fact that the Polish border, the Romanian border, the Hungarian border is open for Ukrainians, that there has been safe passage, that refugees are being taken care of in Europe. But there's also a great fear that these countries are going to close this safe passage, that they're going to close borders and start pushing people back. And so, really encourage the humanitarians and those who are working to support refugees to keep doing that and not to stop. So, those are the main points I want to make. I'd also just like to point out the incredible leadership that President Volodymyr Zelensky has shown. If we maybe used to doubt his leadership capabilities, I don't think anybody's doubting those anymore. He has shown such yeah, just incredible leadership. And I know that he's also doing a lot of things behind the scenes that we, in the international community, in the media coverage are not seeing. And it's inspiring, but again, we shouldn't rely on that. He needs help. Zelensky and his people need Europe right now to step up with humanitarian aid, with supplies, and with assistance.
Thank you very much, Professor Phillips, for sharing your point of view with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for asking. It's really nice to meet you and to speak with you. Thanks for your interest in the topic.